Well, hello everybody, and welcome to episode number 12 of When Ops Meets Dev. Hope you're doing well. Welcome, Robbie, Swami. How are we doing, guys? Episode 12. Still got the energy going?
Yep, very good. I wanted to jump right in and apologize about not responding directly to questions while I'm live coding. I got two team members here who are going to help me do better at that, I think, and we'll address that soon, I guess. But I just wanted to call out right away that maybe over time as I do this more, I'll get a little bit more used to it. I'll be able to watch the stream. I can't do that yet.
It's definitely a skill that needs to be honed, isn't it? But yeah, we got a few people in on the chat as well already. So Magatu from hello from Spain. So yes, hello, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Very good.
Yeah, quite a few people starting to come in now. So I mean,
so Swami's going to be watching that chat. He's going to be chiming in and talking about the things that show up there, I think.
Last session.
Yeah, Magatu, he kept us on toes last episode, so is our favorite audience today. And Ahar Rahman, welcome, and
absolutely,
let's hit the road.
Let's do it. Yeah. So, I mean, Robbie, do you want to introduce the session then? Because we're going to be deep diving a bit now onto the Angular client app, I believe. So.
That's right. So really what we're going to be talking about today is about configuring your project so that it is useful for development and it's meaningful and human for development. I'm going to give you quality of life changes to the project right now. We kind of decided to split it into two parts. We wanted to do it all in one, but it just turned out to be a little bit heavy. So we're going to do the Husky part of this separately, which is how it integrates with Git. First thing I really want to do though is I want to go back and address comments. And I already did, I think, about the dynamics of live coding, but I wanted to address some of the comments that were actually listed. So one thing that was noted was that the white theme on Visual Studio Code, like I had a really white theme going, and I'm going to try and remember. In fact, I actually forgot. I have to go back and do it right now while I'm reading my notes, which are in this. But the white theme I had was not really well received, but I've switched over to isolarized, which is a solar. So it's like a light yellow color, and I think it looks more legible. I hope that that's okay. There's a little bit of seriousness about that though, because like the theme that you use for Visual Studio Code, like or any other editor that you're going to use, needs to fit your coding environment. And normally you're just choosing it for yourself. But here I have to present this to other people. So please do, voice an opinion if you think that I need to do, or I could benefit from a different presentation theme.
I think one of the big things about presenting, especially code in Windows, is getting that size of font to, probably slightly larger than you're comfortable with when you're actually working on a daily basis. But it's just one of those things so people can see that looks good. Yeah, I think that's one thing I've learned from presenting, certainly on live streams. It's about the size of font, but that is quite nice on the eye, actually, Robbie. That slightly like paper-esque.
Awesome.
Yeah, it looks
good.
Good.
I'm glad to hear that. So the next thing I was going to point out was you should use Angular Material. Whoever gave that comment gave put a fire under Swami's feet. He decided to run off and learn about Angular Material, and on his own he's got a separate thing where he's going through and exercising Angular Material on a project, and we've been working on that a little bit. I had actually raised that suggestion myself before we started all of this, but we decided to kind of make this project reflect our work experience, and we were both working in the same company there, so it was in both of our experience that we had a separate design system that allowed us to precisely encapsulate the design language that the company preferred. So we're going to give you that. We're going to give you your own design system that you can set up rather than using Angular Material.
Right. So I have a point to make over there. As Robbie was mentioning, when I spend a lot of my time learning from others. So whatever I showcase is the lift and shift and customize from other authors from whom I learn. So some of the authors, they prefer to go ahead with their own CSS instead of using any of those frameworks. It's not they are against any of those frameworks, but they call out explicitly that they have full control on this one. We can use any framework. And Robbie, when we were speaking, Robbie and I do, as I was mentioning, pair programming 3 to 4 hours every weekend. And Robbie said that, can we go ahead and start with Angular material? And I requested Robbie, can we write our own CSS just to see that? I mean, we can use the framework existing, but this path, whatever we were choosing, is the hardest path possible, so that we learn more. It's for that greedy reason. I just want to learn more from Robbie.
Yeah, I would also say that it's not exactly the hardest path possible. Like, we're not ejecting the build system and modifying Webpack to, incorporate Tailwind or something like that. But it is a pretty customized, and I think it's really reflective of enterprise development. And I think that was kind of, from my perspective anyway, that was a big deal, is to make sure that we're not just giving you toy examples,
Cool.
So about change detection strategy, that's the next one that was highlighted. Maybe we should talk more about change detection strategy. And that's actually a big topic. And I think that it would be better explored in a proper Angular course. This is not really going to be that. We're going to assume that you want to work with Angular and that you're going to learn Angular with or without this video, or that you already use it, and that you're ready to research that. But we will talk about it. So, like I point out with async pipe, because we're using async pipe to produce products, and the change detection strategy that async pipe uses and that you would typically use without using RX Angular will trigger, like, if on a child component, whenever the change comes through on that pipe, it then calls mark for change on the component that it's in. That mark for change sets that component to be detected for, to be reprocessed for change detection and to re-render the values into the elements, the HTML elements that are present at that point. This all happens not in a virtual DOM, but in what I think they call an interactive DOM. And the component that it's happening in, that component isn't the only component that gets marked for change as a consequence. When you use change detection mark for change, that automatically marks the parent elements as well. So you can use a different tool like RX Angular to get only the HTML that you want, only that component that you want to be marked for change to actually be checked and re-rendered. And so you can speed it up really by using things that are different than async pipe. We're just going to use the standard right now. I think I had mentioned that the first time through, actually, that the async pipe was something that we were going to use, but that there were some problems with it, but it's still pretty performant. It's still pretty useful. The next thing I really want to highlight is talking about Ivy and just-in-time and AOT compilation. And we're actually going to get into that a little bit more right now. Let me just read what I wrote. We promised to address those, but and Swami had done that in the chat live the last session. But we had to refactor our presentation from addressing it earlier because I ran so late. So we will touch on this a little bit as we approach the build process. So what I mean to say there is, right now we're just working on a single project. Shortly, we're going to split it into a design system and that project. So we'll have like 2 front-end oriented repositories. And we're going to cover in the library part and the design system part how to produce an artifact. In that process, we're going to be talking about the build process, and that'll be a good time to come back and talk about that. So we will come back to that. And the last thing I wanted to highlight out of that was dependency injection. I was asked, I should say, to talk about dependency injection, where I think that came up because I was talking about the use of TypeScript public inside of the signature of the constructor of a class. to attach that as a property to the class automatically. But where does the service actually come from whenever you're injecting it into the class is kind of the question. And that happens through dependency injection, which is a common pattern that's used in many different development frameworks. It's really common in iOS development. In a very similar fashion. It is, or modestly similar fashion at least, it is common in Angular as well. And we could go into that, but I don't know that we're going to do that very deeply. I ought to at least describe what's happening, where that service comes from. And so I will come back and talk about that a little bit later whenever we return. Like, we're going to go out, do the design system, then we're going to come back and talk about this, the product's view inside of the client project that we're starting up right now. But I'm not going to do that right away. And I give reasons here. I say, I think that I also indicate that we were using Angular 14, but not standalone components, because the specification is still being shaped. And that's actually talking about the service and where services are within lazy loaded modules and the build process. So I don't know if I probably should have separated this into a separate paragraph, but yeah, we will come back and touch on this a little bit more, just to show where the services come from whenever we open up a service inside of our, like over here, if I go into my products component. Where does this come from? That we can go ahead and do that. We can solve that. But yeah, that's it for now. So Swami, I'm going to pass this back to you. You wanted to talk about the next topic.
Yes, sir. Thank you. So Mugatu, hey, we did that, but not to a much, but at least the NG console, we used it. I just wanted to show. And the topic which I'm going to discuss is brief. It's not in depth, like at least at a high level, like a bootstrap. Like, how do we identify who is loading first and who is coming next? How do we identify? And the sample which I'm using is from one of my favorite author, Felipe Gaviglian. And I completed 70% of his course, and it's pretty excellent. I'm loving that, and that's the sample which I'm working right now. So I'm using his code. Thanks, Felipe. Your course is wonderful. I really liked it. So coming back to this, like, you have some Angular projects. Now this page has been loaded. Let's go to first page or whatever the page we are. What we can do is we can get into this inspect. And once we get into this inspect, if we close all the elements or reduce all the elements, and then we see that three things: HTML, head, and body, three parts. So now in the header piece, you see a lot of things, a lot of styles and other things which are getting injected, which Robbie is going to take care. He's expert. So I'm just here to speak a very small piece. So all these runtime polyfills, styles, vendor.js, these are coming from the build. Once it is built, these are getting injected. And the key thing is, inside the body, there is something known as a app root. That means what we understand is, inside a body, there is something known as a app root. That's one particular element. Okay. So now if we come back, that's one way to identify. And then we can get into this other elements which are getting injected.
Can I just jump in really quickly, Swami, while you're doing that? Johnny, could you put my screen on again, just for a second?
Yeah.
All right. I just wanted to show the same thing from a different perspective. He's showing you the rendered view, and inside of the component, inside of the project in your source folder, it'll automatically generate whenever you first scaffold out your project and index.html. And it's a lot cleaner whenever you look at it this way because it hasn't yet processed it and added in all of the stuff that it's going to add for you. But this is that app root that he's talking about. And it actually knows to attach and send things in there because of the main TS file. So I'm not going to steal your thunder and go all into that, Swami, but I just wanted to show how a Bootstrap module actually attaches and where it attaches in HTML. It's right here.
Yeah, that's the next step which I'm going to come. Johnny, could you put me back on the screen? Thanks. So this is here, and another thing is you can have this Angular extension where you can get deep into the weeds, like what all the elements which are getting rendered, and do a deep dive. That's again Robbie will take care. I will only touch upon at a high level, like what all those things. Like this is the app root. This is from the visual look and feel. We at least understand that there's something known as app root which is coming in. Now coming to the source code, we'll start our life at Angular JSON. When it comes to the Angular JSON, here it says that how do you know that the index file, Robbie showed that it is loading an index file, but how do you know that? Who is deciding that it has to load the index file? So the answer for that is in line number 21 and 22. So the index file, it says that is this HTML and it's going to hit this main.ts. So again, if we come back to this index, that's what Robbie has already shown. I'm not going to touch it again, but at least we know that this index file is the one which is loading this app root. We'll come back to that. And then if you see the main.ts, the one which we saw in Angular JSON, line number 21 and 22, it comes to the main.ts, and main.ts is bootstrapping the app module. So if we come to this component, app component, and that's what is being loaded inside this one. The element which we specify here, the selector, that same selector we have injected here. And inside this app component HTML piece, we have the router outlet and other elements which are there. At least from a high level, you will have the class or the component and the HTML markup and the CSS that you will see here. A component is made up of like a selector and the HTML and set of styles. So back to you, Robbie. You can fill in anything I missed it.
Okay, yeah. So no, I don't think you missed very much there. Nothing that I want to cover. I'm actually kind of curious because I didn't see the screen very clearly when you were talking about where it's specified. Was that in the Angular JSON?
Yes, sir. Yeah, there you go.
All right,
Yeah,
so you were showing this. Very good.
Yeah.
And if I go over here, right, okay. So what I wanted to talk about was...
Those two points, I learned it from another author, Vasco, from Angular University. That guy, or Maximilian, I was going through, and Deborah Kurata, these three authors, I was going through their courses. So I don't know who, but one out of them, they clearly explained, start your life from Angular JSON, see that who is first getting loaded, who is instructing Angular to go and load the index.html. That's where they started. I really love them.
That's actually, yeah, a similar treatment of dependency injection is probably due at some point soon. We will come back to that, I promise. I'm just not prepared to present that today because today I'm here to present quality of life. I'm here to make life easy for developers. And to do that doesn't necessarily mean to take like the easiest path to, to create a large complex component because I only need one component in order to render one view. I want to break things up and I want to make it so that it's maintainable. Whenever I say quality of life, what I'm talking about is not while you're writing, when you sit down and write something once, but it's during the entire SDLC and it's working with other developers, right? So the things that I want to highlight here are that eventually we're going to have testing for CI/CD so that we can do regression whenever we make changes. We can at least start regression whenever we make changes directly from our spec files. And we can have that done during our commit and push process so that we don't forget to do it, We can also enforce style through ESLint. And we can also enforce style through tsconfig. And we can also make our imports and things like that a little bit more friendly in tsconfig. And the final thing I want to point out is that we can set up multiple environments for different development purposes. To do that, the best way I think to do that is to separate the concern of separate concerns between selecting the environment and presenting state to the components. So like right now in our environment.prod, we've got the API host right in here. This is a state that will matter inside of the app. Whereas this is an indication of which environment we're running. And if we look at the one that gets swapped in prod, it's different, right? This here in prod production is true because you're in prod. And presumably the API host could be different between those two environments. Like this one might be a prod API host, and this one might be a dev or some other level API host, a different tier API host. And that's fine. And a lot of people do this, but there are problems with making these things map together very tightly, which I'm hoping to help us avoid. So before I do that though, let's actually start somewhere else. Let's start with linting, because linting is something that you're gonna want. If I go here into the client, this is just enforcing rules in the client to allow us to, style rules, like do I want semicolons, those sorts of things. And ESLint comes prepackaged with good rules for TypeScript. And then there are also some additional ones that we can get given to us from Angular. And so actually I'm going to go ahead and use that if it will let me paste it. Got a line on the ng client web README file that I'm just copying and pasting right now, but it looks like it's going to take its time. So I think I have it here in history too. Let me find it there. Yeah, these schematics add different scaffolding to your project. Like for example, we can do a very similar thing to set up Jest and replace Jasmine, which is the default with Jest. I kind of like Jest because it more cleanly, it's more clean. It tends to be a little bit faster in some cases, or much faster in other cases. And it's easier to set up in a CI/CD, or at least it used to be way back in the Angular 5 days. It might have changed by now. Used to be easier to set up in CI/CD. So the schematics is actually just going to change our project. It's going to change what's in our, how it's set up, like it tells you what it's updating, package JSON, Angular JSON. And then that's it. That gives us, at that point, that gives us ESLint. So if I come in here now, I should have an ESLint JSON. And in my ESLint JSON, I have rules. So here is where I can add custom rules. Like I could add a rule like, for semicolons. I actually don't remember exactly how this works. It's like, let me look it up real quick. Well, I don't even need to do that. Oh, I see here, it's error and never or whatever. So I can do like that. And then this would say, give me an error anytime that there's a semicolon, because in my team, I don't want semicolons at the end of lines unnecessarily. Let's get rid of that rule. But I just wanted to show you, this is where you can add such rules. This is how you can set up ESLint. And then you'll actually get, let me restore that just so we can show it off. Now, if I go into my component.ts file, I may need to reload this now that I've got that in there.
Robbie, if you
Or I
don't
may
mind,
not
could you
have said.
please maximize that window, the
Yeah,
Visual Studio
I
Code?
can do that. I don't know that it benefits you though. You can see every piece of code in this file right now. I am not getting the hinting that I was hoping to show off right now, which is kind of a shame. It might just be because I've got error to never, or instead of error to always, or something. Let me look up the rule really quickly. Now I actually have to look up the rule because I can't remember. ESLint semicolons never. Yeah, so never was right. Semi, error, never. All right, so let's actually just go through, let's assume that that's working and that let's work around the presentation issue since look at that, I don't even have ESLint installed. So this is the next thing I was going to show anyway, is that in order to benefit from this, you need to make sure you have this set up. And I do have it set up in my other copy of VS Code, but not in this one. So let me go ahead and set that up. Now that I have ESLint installed, I am hoping that if I go back now to app component and add a new semicolon, what's wrong with this component here? Oh, there's a parsing problem with my tsconfig. Oh, wait, am I in the right folder? Client, yeah. Because it's looking in the wrong place. Oh, that's my fault. All right, so there's one other thing I got to do. I've got to open this in a new window because I don't have the root set correctly. Open folder, session 12, client, there. Sure, save. Okay, so now that the reason the root wasn't set correctly is because I was reading the notes on the session 11 feedback, and that was outside of the root folder here. All right, so now, after a minute, hopefully, we should start getting, there it goes. Whew, I was getting nervous. All right, let me maximize this just so that I can get this in a good place. There. So the extra semicolon is coming from the rule that I added myself, telling me that I should not have unnecessary semicolons, which maybe I don't actually want to enforce. But for now, that's fine. So that's one quality of life thing, is that now this will enforce style regards ESLint. But there's also some TypeScript style that can be enforced as well, like in tsconfig. This is already generated for you. You don't have to do anything to get your tsconfig in the project. But one of the things we can do is we can simplify import rules by adding paths. And these paths will get translated correctly whenever we go to consume them later. So like the default one I usually add is this one here. That says anything that begins with a slash. I'll show you how it works in a second. It should look for that in this location. What's wrong with this? Oh, it's because I'm doing an array instead of an object. But here we'll do a second one really quickly, just at the same time, because we'll be able to demonstrate it. So this allows you to change this path here to look like this. And the star here says to take everything that's after that within the path part in your import statement. It just applies to import statements, and swap out this basically for this and look for it there. And if you had multiple folders, you could actually append and have multiple folders in a row here, and that'd be fine. This one here doesn't have a star, so it's going to match only exactly that word, and it's going to match it exactly to that file. As long as you have your spelling correctly, all of that should work. And so you can, as a consequence, you could change this like that, and your import works. Your import statement clearly at that point works. So that's a nice thing that you can add the TS config. That's not the only type of thing you can do though. You can give rules about when hinting should occur regards the result of a method or function, or the type of parameter that's provided to a method or a function. How much type information you need and when you want to benefit from it. You can specify that here in the TS config. So an example which I think is actually worth adding, and I added it in the hint, so I'm gonna add it here as well. I added it in the documentation. Is suppress implicit any index errors for true. Now, what this does is there are places where you could have in code a value that has an index. Like imagine that's an array, and then you have some value, and then some value might not have a specific, might have come from somewhere where it doesn't have a specific type. So you might get an error, and this gets rid of that if you're using something as an index, but only in the case that you're using it as an index. The error actually being the squiggly lines that you were seeing. Swami, has anything come up in the chat so far?
No, things are pretty clear. So there's nothing as of now. So he asked about that NX console. I told that we used it, but not to a. I mean, at least I used at a user level, but didn't go deep. And then
NX console.
You use the mono.
Do you mean NG on the console?
NX console.
Okay, we'll have to look at it afterwards. I'm not.
Yeah,
entirely
and and then that's from this Angular projects book, the latest book that shows that how do we install, and NX is doing the heavy lifting. NX console, that's doing the heavy lifting, and apart from that, he gave a couple of authors. I forgot John Popper's name. Deborah Kurata and other Angular evangelists. I truly like those authors for sure. And regarding the path, he specified that that's a cool one, and I conquered that. We can get rid of the hell of ... / those.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And you'll re-encounter that whenever you go to, if you swap out jest, you put in jest. You're going to re-encounter that kind of, and you're going to need to reinforce. You're going to have to enforce a separate way of defining path for jest. So you'll basically have to maintain two lists of configurations that are the same, so that your path imports continue to work in jest. At least that's been my typical experience. But it's worth it because it's not like you're making a lot of changes here. You're going to have a couple of things like environment, and actually we'll have config in our project, things of that nature. And config currently doesn't exist, but we'll create it shortly.
Yeah, the readability is very much increased when we use the path instead of the dots, because you don't know from which folder you're entering into which folder. Like those many dots will confuse you. end of the day.
And
This
another
is
thing
pretty
is
clear.
we're transitioning away from global state. Like a few years ago, it was really common in the front end to have a global state presentation, and you would have either atomic components that are all getting data from global state, or you would have more complicated components that are only sometimes compartmentalized into smaller components as needed. That second pattern of only sometimes doing it has become much more common since hooks have been introduced to React, and people are kind of reverting back to that style of not like oversimplifying basically. As a consequence, it's really common to have complicated and nested trees, and if you have a value that needs to be shared between two different trees, then at that point you've got a lot of different dots that are going on if you don't have imports, in path hints. I mean, the way we set up.
True.
So definitely worth it. The next thing I wanted to talk about really was separation of environment and configuration. We already started to talk about it a little bit, but let's actually get into the weeds with that. AngularJSON is a file that you use to configure the project. And you can provide different configurations that receive values from different locations, which can be useful for things like testing or to provide different ways of developing the project locally. So that's what I'm going to explore with you guys today is setting this up so that you have two different ways to develop locally. And I think you might find this worthwhile. But first, let's just look in the AngularJSON configurations. Here's the production configuration. It's got details about budgets, which affects when you're going to get warnings and errors relative to the size of objects that it is able to produce with Ivy, which I promise we go into more detail later. And then there's other details here. The one that I really want to show you is this file replacement section here. Because this file replacement section, what it does is during compilation, if you're doing build with environment as production, then it's going to, before it starts, it's going to replace this file here with this file here, right? So that's how environment.prod gets read. And that's why my, where is it? Is it my tsconfig? In my tsconfig, that's why my hint points to environment.ts and it doesn't need to change, it'll work. Even though environment prod and environment config or environment ts are two different files. And let me get rid of that semicolon rule now because it's annoying me. Where did I put that? That's in ESLint rule, right? Yeah. All right. So in AngularJSON, this is how you do that. What I would like to do is have a development environment. I can imagine in a real world scenario, production builds to production resources. And so there are going to be things like URLs that point to production URLs. And then in development, we might have a development URL instead. But you could imagine that you might want to have, instead of the development URL, you might want to have one that's just using local development, right? Like just a local server, I mean. Or you might have local development and you might want to be able to say, don't connect to the backend. Don't even do that call. I'm just going to mock the data, right? That would be really useful for a developer who is expecting an endpoint, but he doesn't have it yet, right? So a pattern that I used to follow dating back for the past half a decade or so now, I've been following, is that usually, or a lot of times, the front end is in the position to be ahead of the back end in terms of what information is available to them. So we would make a schema and say, can you give me the schema? And then we would meet with the back end and they would say, not back end, the middle tier. They would look at it and say, yeah, that one works. Or what's this, where do I get this from? And after you figured out what the schema is supposed to look like, that would be it. They didn't have to stand up a dummy version before I could start working on it. I could just immediately start using mocks of that schema in my environment. And I can show you how to do that in a clean way that doesn't affect the code, the inline code in your component, like any methods that you have in here. Let me go over to a place that actually has a method. Any methods in here, I don't have to change ng on init in order to not actually get the products, right? I can actually use aspect-oriented programming to say, you know, like interrupting before, and, you know, do something else, and it will do something else under that under the condition that that is satisfied. So you might need, you know, 2 lines here. You might need like condition, and then do something else. But in this way, by putting it into a decorator, you can leave this function pure, the way it looks in production, and it'll compile down to that. Whenever you compile it, you won't see this stuff because the condition won't be true, and this affects the class during compilation, right? Or during creation. So we can drop that for now, but that's the type of setup that we're heading towards. We want to be able to do that if we want to, and we want to be able to not hit APIs if we want to. So in Angular JSON, let's create a new one for local development. And this, I'm actually just going to copy development because everything in development is right for local development as well. But I want to give a new file replacement URL, and I'm going to use a special. I'm going to make sure that it's got a special endpoint, which you'll see whenever it reads the endpoints, so that just looking at the endpoint, you can tell whether or not or which environment you're in. So now that I've created local dev, I can now build with local dev. I can let me just do ng build environment production. First, I'm going to show you that way. That's the right way to do it. And is it not environment? It's configuration. And you can see it's building just fine there. If I now change this to local dev, if it's going to work, I don't know why it's not working. There we go. Again, it's actually going to build. What did I do wrong there? Oh yeah, because I don't have the environment.localdev.ts set up. So let's go do that next. That sounds like a great next step. So I now have this environment.localdev requirement, so I ought to make it. So we'll copy that and paste it. And we'll just create a flag like is headless is false. And so now this is production false just like before, but now, I'm sorry, is headless is true. Now it is not only production, but, or not only not production and therefore development, but it's also headless development, right? It's the combination of those 2 details. I'm not going to want API host in here. I'm going to want to get rid of this. That's kind of part of what we're doing, but let's just start by doing that piece. We've created that. The other thing I really want to do is I want to make it easier to read this. I don't like this production false. So what I like to do for various reasons is to have an environments, an enum, and I'm going to say the environment is development because this is a development class environment. And then there'll be 2 different types. There'll be one that's headless and one that's not. So I can take this and I can put it in here as well. And then in here, in the prod one, I will put it in and make it production. Now I need to set that up so that this is not a squiggly line and so that I can actually get to the API host, the values that are going to be determined based on the environment. I want to separate those 2 concerns. So let me go ahead and do that now with a config folder. And in my config folder, I'll have an index.ts, and I will also have a prod.ts. And I'm going to have a folder for dev because there are 2 different types of dev environments. There's a default dev environment, like non-local dev environment where it's actually hitting the APIs, but also a headless dev environment or a local dev environment, it could have been, where I can get to that. And finally, let me give my config a model, a set of a place to put different types. So I'm going to call it model.ts based on a similar naming convention that I saw Swami use earlier, actually, although you may not feel like I'm doing a faithful rendition of it. But this is just a version, and I'm just doing it like this right now because I feel inspired to. So I know that I'm going to have an environment enum with production and development. And I know also that I have a type, an interface, that I want to hold all of those environments to a contract. I want to make sure that I can always interpret the environment the same way. So I'm writing the contract for environment at the same time. I know it's got an ENV of type environments, and that it has I happen to know that for other reasons, production is, provided by default from Angular. That's just the way they prefer to do that. So I'll add production. And then I'm going to give is headless and make that an optional Boolean so that we can reference it. And now if I come back and correct my import and set my type, now API host is the error, but the rest of it looks good. So that's great. Let me go ahead and let's finish fixing that in the other ones as well. That one's in prod and now local dev. All right, so let's go ahead and get rid of API host right now, and move that to the configuration. So like in production, now we need to set up a config, and it will have API host string. You would have, the reason that I'm doing that is for the same reason I did with environments. I want to hold them to the same contract. So I'm going to specify prod this way, and then I'm going to do the same thing whenever I specify it again in development. And in headless, we'll specify a different one. See here, actually, just to be extra clear, we'll make this like that. All right, so now we've got a dev tier URL for API host, and in headless, I've got config dummy data. Now I actually want to be able to consume those in index and expose it. And for that, I'm actually just going to copy and steal the code that I've already written, because it's a little bit more complicated to write that code. So give me just a second. Or cat even. Okay, so now I've got that all set up, and the only thing is I need to change my paths a little bit. So let's just look at that code together really quickly. The way this is working, I'm just providing a function that, or not a function, but a value that is an iffy, like an IFE, and immediately, is it like immediately executed functional expression?
IIEF.
Yeah. So it's just one of those. I'm just immediately rendering the value one time, and it's going to be an environment. If the environment is headless and it's development, then it's going to give you the headless environment configuration from here. Otherwise, it'll give you the dev configuration. I guess I don't really need a break there if I'm returning. If it's in production, I'm just going to return the production value. And if I don't know what it is, this is dangerous, actually. I should really make probably the less dangerous way of doing it, just to allow for human error, would be in a production environment, would be to do it this way, where the default is to return production. I feel so strongly about that I'm not even gonna, I'm just gonna return it back to this so that you can see where it was originally, where we were throwing an error. But I think it makes sense to default to production. Like the way that they have it initially, where environment.ts is the default environment is dev environment, and there's a separate one for prod. I kind of disagree with that whole structure, but that's just because I've had it happen where occasions have occurred where developers have made changes where it was assumed that it was in the production environment, and they only set up the environment, not the production environment. Sorry for that little bit of detail, but the idea here is now we've got an exposed config, and let me actually just make one other change here while we're looking at handy things. I'd love to have one for config as well. So now that I've done that, I can go into my products service, and I'm hoping I can strip environment for now and make this instead config. And I'm going to get config from config. So it's the same structure in this particular case, but now we're going to consume it from, because this is a configuration, this is application state, right? So we're going to get application state from configuration. We're going to leave environment only to inform application state. And in this way now, that actually sets up that configuration. We have now a clean split. So I should be able to, let me do it here even, where you would normally do it. Oh yeah, I almost forgot to do this. I actually want that to be served. So I should be able to ng run start headless. And this will give me an error whenever we do the I'm assuming I get that set up correctly. When we launch this, we'll still see an error in the browser, but the error that we're going to see is that the URL doesn't exist because the URL says dummy data. We haven't set up the aspect-oriented programming around that yet. But first I do need to figure out configuration local dev is not set in the workspace. And I thought it was. Let me make sure I've got everything saved. Save all. I may need to take a second off screen to research that because I should have it. I've got it right here. And I was just doing it actually here. Let me try it from here. Am I getting the same error? I am, but it's not the error I got before. All right, guys, I'm actually going to need a little bit of debug time to work on that, but I showed all the configuration that's involved.
Oh yeah, I think I have a couple of points to show. Shall I?
Yeah, please. Now is the time.
Johnny?
There we go.
Thanks, Johnny. It's again coming from the Angular JSON, and Robbie is my guru. I learn Angular from Robbie. So one of the new thing which I learned while doing this exercise was to how do we push the assets from one of the folders in Node.js. So this was the syntax which we Googled and we put it like getting all this glob and take the input folder and drop it to the output folder. That's one thing. And another thing is how to use that was here to create a default icon and drop these, use these icons with the assets folder. So these two go hand in hand. First, you copy the folders from the node module in wherever the destination folder to the output folder. And inside your component, you can refer that using the output folder / the icons. That was very wonderful thing. I learned it. I don't know whether I did it right or not, but I called Robbie to validate the change I did. Then Robbie went into the leaflet JSON and he showed that live there itself. Hey, these code were there, and then we modified it. And the second thing I want to highlight here is in the Angular JSON, the styles. And anytime you want to globally use this, some of the styles, you can drop it here. Or other thing, what we generally do is drop that styles in the styles.scs. And the third thing is the scripts in each JS which you want to use across, you can put it here. The one thing I learned was, which was pretty new to me, was that there's this dependent module. When I save this and compile, so it says that one of the dependency module is missing. That was for the leaflet. So it says that the leaflet depends on one other module, and it gives us a warning. It didn't stop working, and it didn't create any problem. The only thing is I was seeing that red warning over there. So,
we'll look at it tomorrow. It does work for you though?
Which one?
It does work for you though? It just gives you a warning?
It works. It works. The only thing is it was just throwing a warning on my face saying that, hey, you forgot about this. But it works fine. It didn't trouble. I saw that. And then I was browsing to find the solution. it works for sure.
Can I share? I found the solution to my problem. I skipped a
Oh yeah,
step
please
actually in Angular
take it back.
JSON.
Take it
I
back.
really
Yeah.
ought to cover it.
Mhm.
Johnny,
There
can
you
you
go.
just let me know
Yeah,
when
you're
that
back
screen?
on. You're back on.
Awesome. All right. So the thing I forgot is that there's not only is there a configuration for the architecture, for the different projects, but then there's also a configuration for serve. And so you have to tell serve how to build it. And so what I needed to do was just take development, copy it and paste it again, and then change it to local dev so that it matched the same value up here. Now, as a consequence of that, I can now do npm run start headless, and it will actually load up. And this is actually cool because I'll at the end of this I'll be able to show that the URL has changed, which means it's getting the different configuration that we set up. You won't be able to see products is the only problem, right? That'll be for another day. So if we go to products here and then go in and inspect, we should see an error to, let me find it on the network tab maybe. Let me just reload the page. Yeah, here on products, we went to we went to dev tier URI. Did I do the, I bet you I have dev tier URI written. No, I don't. So index is headless, configuration API host. I'm getting this value and I really want this value over here. And I'm returning that on, if it is headless, I'm returning headless, which is dev headless. Otherwise I'm returning dev, which is right. All right, hold on. One more time. Let me reload that page, see that value. And I can see right here, oh, I'm not getting the right environment, am I? Is headless is true here in environment.localdev, and then I'm passing in my file replacements for local dev. I'm replacing environment with environment local dev, which is correct. But then when I look at the rendered environment, I don't see the correct one. Let me just test really quickly to see if that's coming from. I do that. Now do I see it? I do see it. And now the URL that I get is correct. It's dummy data on localhost, which is just fine. So I'm just getting the wrong environment, which means my Angular JSON is still not correct. Oh no. Maybe I can't just do a raw copy whenever I do this. Is that true? Yeah.
Shall I flip it to my screen? Just wanted to show that real quick while you are hunting this.
Okay.
Yep.
Oh,
Go for it.
Yeah, just change it. Robbie, see this? I deleted this line, and when I did a npm start, it
I can't tell what
compiles
that line is.
and it throws this message. But
Can you make your zoom
can
bigger? I can't tell what that line is. You said
Oh,
you deleted the line. I can't see it.
Oh, leaflet.
Oh, okay.
The leaflet allowed common JS dependencies. So it throws this exception, but when I can very well come into this, and it's the city where I born and raised, Hyderabad. So I'm just able to traverse properly. The only thing is I figured it out. I just did a little bit of Google, and the moment I drop this under allowed common dependencies,
Yeah.
It does recompile, and it throws the. I mean, it stops. Now see this, when it does a rebundling, it takes care of loading this, and it doesn't throw that warning at all. Now see this, it's doing this bundling, and now it doesn't throw that. So
Okay,
I just
smart.
explored this new one. So just wanted to
To show you,
figure
yeah.
out.
So we might get a chance to look at changing. Is that style imports, or is that, which one is that?
Oh, allowed common JS dependencies, because the error it was throwing was
Yeah.
that ngx leaflet depends on leaflet. Common JS or AMD dependencies can cause optimization bailouts.
Yep. So those sorts of
So,
configurations are set in Angular JSON.
right.
And yeah, if you're using legacy libraries that are designed for common JS, then you can have problems. So if Johnny, if we can switch back one more time, I did find it. It was just a misconfiguration. I gave a bad instruction previously, so now I need to double down onto what was wrong the first time. On my screen now, you can see what we used to have as a browser target was set to client build development. And so what it was doing is the same thing as development. It was going and finding the build instruction for development. And that's why I was getting the environment. You can see environment here. The regular environment doesn't have is headless because I had added it as a test, but I've removed it. Here, the environment is headless is set. When we were looking at it rendered on the screen, we weren't seeing it. The reason that we weren't seeing is headless is because we were specifying the local dev environment should instead build the development environment build instructions here, which don't swap the environments file. So I needed to specify local dev. So if I come back down here, instead of copying and pasting this line literally, I needed to copy and paste it and then make it correct like that. Now the consequence of that is that this build won't actually work until I killed it and restarted it, but I've already done that. So because I needed to test to make sure that it was going to work. And now I can see is headless is true in my Angular environment on a reload. And I can see an error that I'm getting trying to load products, but that's because I'm going to dummy data. I'm not going to the dev tier URL, which was listed before. So this is an error that we want for now, but later on we'll actually use this configuration to opt out of actually doing the network call, since we're just developing locally anyway, and we'll just return a mocked response. And that actually is the thing I was supposed to show you guys. So I think we're done at this point. Thank you guys for your patience with.
Yeah, well done, Robbie. No, that was great. It was a good run through. I think it's great we can do these series and kind of delve down into the nuts and bolts of actually, looking at, because for me as a non-developer, as the ops person in the team, it's, interesting to be able to kind of relate to some of this dev world as well, so how that pulls through later down the line when we're doing more and we're going back to the infra and deploying. It's a great session to run through. So yeah, thank you, Robbie. That was great.
So what Robbie and we do while we are doing pair programming is we are ensuring that you are not able to understand this dev pieces. We want you to be in the ops area. So we will hide some of those tips and tricks from you. We don't want you to be our competitor.
But this is the thing, isn't it? I mean, this is the point, isn't it? It's like, which level do you abstract the complexity? Because there's complexity at every single level, isn't it? Right the way from product development, right the way through. So it's like it's great to kind of delve into the complex world of others.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I've had a lot of fun delving into the Terraform with you guys, even further than I did at work, I think, with Kubernetes.
Cool. Oh, the next big piece, which is coming in 2023, is like the configuration server, which Robbie has written in Node.js in Azure function. that Robbie and I we deployed it to AKS and we tested, and a couple of other changes, and we did the Docker image of that, pushed it to the Docker hub, and pulled it from there and deployed to the AKS. That's what we tested last Saturday. We did that. So a lot of things are coming in future episodes. So I'm eagerly waiting.
I got something for you. Next session, we're going to go a little bit further into the weeds here. We're going to look at setting up something that will be useful in CI/CD. So it's actually Husky, but in the process, we're going to set up Jest, and that'll allow us to set up some integration tests and possibly other types of tests, but at least integration or unit tests, depending on how you want to look.
That's going to be cool. I mean, in a sense of when we do CI/CD, is just to see some of those components actually in action, and maybe discuss why it's an important thing to kind of look at introducing, dependency testing, that whole, that shift left mentality into kind of building security into your code, as well, and trying to understand some of those concepts. That'd be cool to cover off as well. But for now, I mean, it's been a great session. Yeah, thanks again, Robbie and Swami. Great to see. Go on, one more point. Go on, Swami.
Yeah, I really loved Husky. I still remember I called Robbie, and Robbie was hand-holding me to set Husky on my box, and I really enjoyed it, that one, because it does whatever you want to do as a pre-check before committing, because we don't want the lint issues or something. We commit left, right, and center. The moment you raise a PR, it goes for a gated build, and then it shows 1001 issues. We need to come and fix those 1001 issues. So before every push, there is a gated check right on our laptop, like, hey, you can't push this mess into the branch. So we are not even pushing the mess into the branch. So the moment you try to git push, it runs this Husky and throws those errors on our face, saying that, hey, can you please fix it before pushing it to the branch? I really love that. That's the gate we should have for having a good quality of life and good night's sleep also.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that's right. That will be a quality of life thing. I think it does tie into both. I think it goes into the CD part too. Coming December 2nd.
Cool. That's our next session. What's that? That's 2 weeks. It's only 2 weeks away, isn't it? Yeah, 2. It is. Cool. Well, for now, guys, it's great as always to catch up. It's like a masterclass every session for me. So great to see you both. Have a great weekend, and thank you to everybody that's tuned in and kind of fed back some comments in the chat there. See you guys soon. We'll catch up in the week, but see you for the next episode in 2 weeks.
Bye.
Good night, folks.
I'm going to check out those comments now.
Yeah. See you again.
Okay.